No one visits the old meadow this early in the season. The wildflowers haven't quite peaked, and the air above the grass holds a persistent chill, as if the memory of winter still lingers just out of sight. The city of Missoula, Montana, huddles in the valley below. But up here, the world feels smaller, wrapped in the hush that only early morning can bring. Lena walks alone. At 46, she has perfected the art of moving quietly, steps absorbed by the soft earth, hands tucked deep in the pockets of a jacket, faded by years of rain and wind. She barely notices the beauty, how the morning sun edges the distant mountains in gold, how the sweet, sharp scent of sagebrush rises with each step. Beauty, she's learned, can hurt almost as much as memory. It had been 2 years since she'd last set foot on this trail, 2 years since she'd come this way, always with a purpose, to visit Emily, her favorite patient, a child with a laugh that seemed to fill even the coldest rooms. But Emily was gone now, and Lena, once a pediatric hospice nurse who never missed a shift, had retreated from everything she'd known. Today, for reasons she can't explain, she finds herself drawn back. Her rental cabin sits a mile away, tucked under the shadow of pine trees, almost invisible to the world. Lena hasn't answered her phone in weeks, and her neighbors know better than to knock. Out here she feels anonymous, untouchable, except for the ache that has set up residence in her chest, refusing to let her go. The meadow appears suddenly, bursting into view between the trees, bright with the earliest flush of wild lupine and yarrow. Lena pauses, heart thumping with something she won't name. She almost turns back. She always does. That is when she sees him, at the far edge of the clearing, beside a tumble of stones. A dog sits in perfect stillness, black and white, his coat like the kind of ink spill that artists hope for but never achieve. His eyes, dark, watching, ancient, are fixed on Lena. He doesn't bark, doesn't move, doesn't so much as twitch an ear. He simply waits. She freezes, one foot hovering above the grass. Lena's first thought is that he must belong to someone nearby, but there's no collar, no tag glinting in the light, no sign of another soul on the trail. The dog looks well fed, his fur thick and clean. He's not lost, she thinks, at least not in the usual way. The meadow, once a refuge, feels suddenly crowded, haunted by the silent witness at its edge. Lena's breath fogs in the cool air. She forces herself to look away, to keep moving along the old path, her heart racing with a peculiar blend of fear and longing. But every few steps she glances back. The dog hasn't moved. He simply sits, as if he's been waiting for her, and only her, all this time. Memories pulse beneath the surface of her thoughts. The days she'd walked here with Emily, the laughter echoing between the hills, the feel of a small hand curling into her own. Emily had loved dogs. She'd drawn them on every scrap of paper she could find, filling the walls of her hospice room with creatures real and imagined. There was one dog she'd loved most, a black and white collie she called Basil, who would curl at her feet during the worst of her days and nuzzle her awake from nightmares. Lena pushes the thought aside. This is not Basil. That was years ago. This is just a dog. A coincidence. She leaves the meadow behind, feet pounding the trail with unnecessary force, not daring to look back again. That night, in her cramped kitchen, Lena can't shake the image of the dog from her mind. She stands at the window, staring into the blackness, wondering if he's still there. Waiting in the cold grass, she thinks about how she almost called out a name she hasn't spoken aloud in 2 years, Emily. But the word stuck in her throat, trapped by grief and regret. The next morning, drawn by a pull she can't explain, Lena returns. She walks faster this time, her breath coming in short bursts as if she's late for something vital. The air is warmer, the sky a clearer blue, but the meadow feels unchanged, eternal. He's there again. The dog hasn't moved, not an inch. He regards her with the same solemn patience, head slightly tilted, his eyes shining with something Lena refuses to name. She approaches a little closer, stops a safe distance away. "Hey, buddy," she says, her voice hoarse from disuse. The dog doesn't respond. He simply watches, as if he's waiting for her to make the next move. Lena isn't sure what she expects. Maybe for him to run, to bark, to do anything but remain perfectly still. Instead, a strange calm settles over her, the kind she hasn't felt since before Emily's diagnosis. She stands there for several minutes, the silence stretching between them until finally she turns and leaves, glancing back only once. This becomes a pattern. Each day, Lena returns to the meadow. Each day, the collie is there in the exact same spot, silent and steadfast. She begins to bring scraps of food from her kitchen, bits of roast chicken, the crusts of bread she can't finish. She leaves them on a flat stone a few feet from the dog, then steps back to watch. He waits until she's far enough away before eating, never taking his eyes off her for long. She starts thinking of him as Basil, though she doesn't say the name aloud. That's too dangerous. Names have power. Names can bring back memories she isn't ready to face. But the dog, Basil, doesn't press her. He simply waits. One evening, as dusk falls over the meadow, Lena lingers longer than usual. She sits on the grass, knees drawn to her chest, and watches Basil watch her. For the first time in months, she feels something other than pain. She feels seen. In the silence, she almost laughs. It catches her by surprise, a sound she barely recognizes. But it's enough. For the first time, Lena allows herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she isn't as alone as she thought. Mornings in the cabin arrive quietly. Lena wakes to the hush of wind moving through pine needles, the faint creak of her old radiator, and the distant call of a mourning dove, somewhere along the river. She never sets an alarm. There's no need. Her body seems to know when the light is right, when the world is safely empty. She rises, makes tea in silence, and moves through a set of rituals that have become both comfort and confinement. Boil water, pour into the same chipped mug, stand at the small window, and count the days since her last phone call. Too many to recall. She moved into the cabin on the edge of town not long after Emily's funeral, telling herself she needed time to think. She signed the lease for 3 months. It's been almost 2 years. The landlord, a retired school teacher with arthritis, sends an envelope every 6 months. Cash only, no questions asked. The arrangement suits Lena perfectly. She doesn't want to explain herself. She doesn't want to explain anything. Her world has shrunk to fit the boundaries of the cabin, the woods, and now the meadow. The idea of venturing into Missoula, of walking the aisles of the co-op, or lingering at the corner bakery where the staff used to know her name, fills her with a sense of vague terror. She avoids the town, the people, the reminders of who she used to be. Some days she wonders if she's disappearing, bit by bit, like old paint flaking from the porch rail. She answers no calls, deletes unread messages, and never checks her mailbox unless she's certain no one is watching. Lena left nursing months ago, but the weight of those years lingers in her body. She remembers the last shift at the hospice, the way her hands trembled as she packed up her locker for the final time. She remembers the quiet looks exchanged by her colleagues, compassion tinged with exhaustion, as if they all knew that sooner or later, every nurse breaks. She hasn't spoken Emily's name aloud in 2 years. It sits heavy in her chest, unspoken, a word she both clings to and fears. Now, her days pass in half-light. She listens to old records, Ella Fitzgerald, Miles Davis, letting the music fill the empty corners of the cabin. She reads novels she's already memorized, tracing the sentences with her fingers, searching for something she can't quite name. She writes letters she never sends, addressed to no one in particular. Most of the time, she sits by the window, watching the changing light, waiting for the urge to pass. The only place that draws her out is the meadow. Even that comes with a strange mix of dread and longing. It's the one place she both fears and needs. She can't avoid it. The memory of Emily is too strong there, too woven into the landscape to untangle. She tells herself she's only going for a walk. But the truth is, the meadow is a tether, a connection to a time when her life had meaning, even if it was shadowed by loss. The collie, Basil, she calls him now, at least in her mind, has become the silent anchor of her days. Each morning, she bundles up, grabs a handful of scraps from the fridge, and heads out the back door. The trail winds through the woods, past fallen logs and tangled blackberry bushes, until the trees part and the meadow opens before her. Every day, Basil waits in the same spot, as if the world will not move forward until she arrives. Lena brings a blanket one morning, spreading it on the grass a few yards from Basil's perch. She sits cross-legged, careful not to make any sudden movements. The dog remains motionless, but she senses a shift, a flicker of recognition in his dark eyes, a subtle softening of his posture. She sets a piece of leftover chicken on the stone between them, then settles back to watch the clouds drift by. Sometimes she talks to him, her words drifting into the cool air. "You must think I'm crazy," she murmurs, voice barely above a whisper. Talking to a dog, sitting in a field, trying to make sense of things. Basil blinks slowly, as if he understands. Lena laughs. A quiet, rusty sound she hardly recognizes. She begins to bring a book, one she'd once read to Emily during those long, restless nights in the hospice. Its pages are soft and worn, the words familiar. Lena reads aloud, letting her voice carry across the meadow, the cadence soothing even to her own ears. Basil tilts his head, listening intently, his attention unwavering. She wonders what he hears, if he recognizes the story, the tone, the sorrow beneath her words. The act of reading, of speaking, brings a strange comfort. For the first time in months, Lena feels a crack in her armor. She looks forward to her mornings in the meadow, to the silent companionship of Basil, to the way the world seems to open just a little wider when she lets herself be present. But even as she finds solace in the ritual, Lena feels the rest of her life shrinking further away. She ignores phone calls from her sister, who leaves increasingly frantic messages. She declines invitations from her old colleagues, who reach out less and less as time goes by. She hasn't visited the grocery store in weeks, relying on canned goods and what little she can grow in the small garden behind the cabin. Isolation becomes both shield and prison. Some nights, Lena stands at the edge of the meadow long after sunset, watching as shadows swallow the grass and stars prick the sky. She wonders what Emily would say if she could see her now, if she would recognize the woman Lena has become, or if she'd mourn the nurse who used to make her laugh with silly voices and bad jokes. In the silence, Lena feels the ache of absence, the absence of her calling, her friends, her former self. But when she glances back at Basil, waiting patiently in the grass, she senses something else too. A faint, persistent hope. The belief that maybe, just maybe, the act of showing up, of returning to the place where laughter once lived, is a step toward healing, no matter how small. That night, Lena sits at her kitchen table, turning a smooth stone over and over in her hand, listening to the wind against the glass. The world outside is vast and unknowable, but for the first time in a long while, she doesn't feel quite so invisible. The meadow is out there, waiting. Basil is out there, waiting. And in some small, stubborn corner of her heart, Lena is waiting, too, for forgiveness, for peace, for a reason to begin again. Rain comes to Missoula in fits and starts that spring, never quite enough to turn the grass lush, but just enough to leave muddy patches along the trail and bead water on every blade. Lena barely notices the discomfort anymore. She has taken to layering up in her oldest jeans and a worn flannel, her boots caked with earth, her hair gathered back in a practical knot. Each morning, she sets out for the meadow, no matter the weather, no matter how heavy her heart feels when she wakes. And each morning, Basil is there, as constant as the sunrise, seated in that same spot by the stones. His fur ripples with the wind, sometimes spattered with droplets, but he never seems bothered, never leaves for cover. Lena watches him as she approaches, always half expecting that this will be the day he tires of her, moves on, disappears, leaves her truly alone with her memories. But he never does. Over time, the space between them narrows, not by any plan or promise, but by small, almost accidental degrees. Lena learns to trust his rhythms, how he'll accept food only if she sets it on the rock and backs away, how he'll lie down but keep his head up as she sits near, how his eyes soften in the late afternoon light, maybe when the world feels gentler. She starts to talk to him more. At first, it's just observations about the weather, the birds, a joke about the squirrels waging war with the blue jays at the edge of the field. Then she tells him her plans for the day, or the strange dreams that haunt her at night, how she sometimes wakes certain that Emily is calling her name from another room, how the echo lingers long after she realizes the house is empty. Basil never interrupts, never turns away. The patience in his gaze is a kind of mercy she didn't know she needed. One morning, Lena brings more than food. She tucks an old, soft blanket under her arm, a faded blue thing that once covered Emily's hospital bed. She isn't sure why she's kept it, only that she couldn't let it go. Even when she gave away almost everything else, she kneels down in the grass, spreads the blanket out beside Basil's favorite spot, and sits on it. She makes no move to touch him, lets him decide the distance. For a while, Basil just watches her, blinking slowly, but after several minutes, he shifts, curling up at the very edge of the fabric. It feels like a milestone, as though he's accepted her presence in a way words never could. Days bleed into each other, slow and simple. Lena's routine shapes itself around these visits. She finds herself thinking ahead, wondering if Basil will be waiting, planning what to bring him next, noticing more of the world around her. The pattern of clouds, the fresh bloom of wildflowers, the musky scent of damp earth. The meadow changes subtly with the season, and she realizes she's learning its rhythms all over again. One day, she arrives with a book tucked beneath her arm, a children's novel, dog-eared and held together by yellowed tape. She sits on the blanket, glances at Basil, and after a pause, opens the book and begins to read aloud. The story is one she read to Emily 100 times, her voice shaping the rise and fall of each sentence with practiced care. Once upon a time, she begins, her voice trembling only a little, there was a girl who believed magic lived in the meadows. Basil's ears perk up at the sound. He tilts his head, eyes fixed on Lena's face, and for a moment she swears he understands every word. She reads for a long while, sometimes losing herself in the cadence, sometimes choking on memories, because there are passages she skips, not ready to face the emotions stitched inside them. Still, Basil stays, steady as ever, his head sometimes resting on his paws, eyes half closed, but never truly asleep. Reading to Basil becomes their ritual. Some days, Lena brings poetry. Other times, she recounts the plots of stories she can't bear to read aloud, letting her memories fill in the spaces. She feels Emily's presence keenly during these sessions. The way the child's laughter used to ring out, the way her small hand would grip Lena's arm in anticipation of what came next. The meadow, once a place she avoided for fear of pain, becomes the one space where Lena's grief feels a little less heavy. One afternoon, as a storm builds in the distance, Lena closes her book and looks at Basil, who is watching the darkening sky. You know, she says quietly, Emily loved it when the weather turned. She said thunder sounded like distant drumming, like the world was cheering her on. Her voice cracks a little, the admission costing more than she'd like. Basil stands, stretches, and takes a step closer to her, pressing his side gently against her knee before settling back down. The contact, brief as it is, feels like an absolution. It's not all peace and progress. There are days when Lena arrives at the meadow with nothing to give, days when she can barely look at Basil without guilt clawing at her insides. She thinks of all the patients she couldn't save, the families she couldn't comfort, the moments she faltered. The weight of loss sits heavy, but Basil never turns away from her. Not on her worst mornings, not even when she sits in silence and stares at the sky. There are nights when Lena dreams she is back in the hospice, the beep of monitors echoing in her ears, and Emily's small voice rising above it all. She wakes with her heart pounding, sweat slick on her skin, and sometimes, before the fear can settle, she finds herself whispering to the darkness, it's okay, I'm still here. The words are more for herself than anyone else. The days continue, marked by small, significant changes. Lena starts to bring her journal to the meadow, scribbling notes and sketches while Basil naps nearby. She doesn't write about the hard things yet, but she writes about the light, the movement of grass, the way Basil's fur shines in the sun. The act of writing, of putting thoughts outside her body, feels almost rebellious. A way to say that she's still part of the world, even if she's only an observer for now. Late one afternoon, as the sun burns low and golden across the meadow, Lena closes her eyes and lets the warmth seep into her skin. She thinks, for the first time in a long time, that maybe healing isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about letting memory settle in beside you, like a loyal dog who never leaves, waiting patiently until you're ready to move again. Days in Missoula are growing longer, with sunlight lingering in the sky well into the evening. Lena's walks to the meadow have become more certain, her steps quicker, and her heart less heavy with dread. She's begun to find a strange comfort in the ritual. The way the light dapples through the pines, the earthy scent of warming soil, the steady companionship of Basil, waiting in his familiar place. Their silent bond grows deeper with each passing day. But comfort is a fragile thing, and Lena is about to discover that the past is never as far away as it seems. One Monday, Lena rises earlier than usual, drawn to the meadow by a restless energy she can't explain. The air is brisk, laced with the promise of rain, but she welcomes the change. Her hands are full: bread, chicken scraps, her battered book, and a flask of tea. As she emerges from the trees, she sees Basil already alert, watching her with that unwavering gaze. She feels the familiar warmth in her chest and sets down her things, settling onto the blanket. She's halfway through a story when she hears footsteps crunching in the grass behind her. Lena stiffens, every muscle in her body tensing at the intrusion. She isn't used to seeing anyone on this trail. Not this early, not ever. Instinctively, she moves to shield Basil with her body, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios: an aggressive hiker, a wild animal, someone from her old life come to shatter the fragile peace she's found. The footsteps slow, then stop. "Lena," a voice calls, uncertain, tinged with disbelief. Lena's breath catches. The voice is familiar, though she hasn't heard it in years. A little rougher, but still carrying the confident warmth she remembers from long shifts at the children's hospital. She turns to see Claire standing at the edge of the clearing, backpack slung over one shoulder, wind-blown hair curling around her face. "Claire?" Lena's voice is barely a whisper, as if saying the name might undo her careful solitude. Claire steps closer, her eyes wide as she takes in the scene, the blanket, the scattered food, the attentive Collie at Lena's side. "I thought it was you," she says, her smile uncertain, almost apologetic. I'm up from Boise for a conference. Decided to hike before the rain." She hesitates, gaze shifting to Basil. "Is that, Basil?" The name falls heavy in the air, like a stone tossed into still water. Lena's heart stutters. She's called the dog Basil in her mind for weeks, but to hear someone else say it, to have the name spoken aloud, makes her rasat chest tighten with dread and disbelief. "You know him?" she manages, voice strained. Claire crouches, her eyes filling with recognition and something like awe. "I haven't seen him since Emily." Her words falter, caught between memory and grief. "He disappeared the day after she passed. We all thought he ran off. No one ever found him, not even the rescue group." Lena feels the ground tilt beneath her. The coincidence is too sharp, too precise. For weeks she'd told herself the dog's resemblance to Basil was just wishful thinking, a trick of grief, a projection of longing. But now, confronted with the truth, she's stunned. Her mind races back to the hospice, to Emily's small hands buried in Basil's fur, to the child's laughter echoing through the sterile hallways, to the day Basil vanished, just as Emily slipped away for the last time. Claire's eyes are gentle as she studies Lena. He was her shadow, you know. Wouldn't leave her side for anything. When he disappeared, it was like losing her all over again. Claire reaches out tentatively, letting Basil sniff her hand. The dog's nose twitches, but he doesn't move away. It's him, she says quietly, her certainty absolute. I'd know that face. Anywhere. A wave of emotion crashes over Lena. Shock, relief, guilt, awe. She realizes, in a flood of memory, that the meadow wasn't a random place after all. It was Emily's favorite spot. The place where, even on her worst days, the little girl could find something to smile about. A butterfly. A cloud shaped like a horse, Basil bounding through the tall grass. It was here, on a sun-drenched afternoon 2 years ago, that Emily had laughed for the last time, her joy bright and full, even as the end loomed near. Lena's voice is shaky when she speaks. I didn't want to believe it was him. I thought it was just a dog. I needed it to be just a dog. Claire's expression softens. Grief does strange things, Lena. It hides what we're not ready to see. The air feels heavy with everything unspoken. Basil looks from one woman to the other, his eyes deep and unblinking, as if he's holding all the secrets of the meadow inside him. Lena feels the weight of her own denial, her reluctance to face the memories tied so tightly to this place and this animal. After a while, Claire stands, brushing grass from her knees. I should get going before the rain hits, but I'm glad you found each other. She smiles, real and bittersweet. Or maybe you both just found your way back. Lena nods, unable to reply. She watches as Claire disappears down the trail, her form swallowed by the trees. The meadow is quiet again, save for the distant roll of thunder and Basil's steady breath beside her. She sits for a long time, staring at the place where Emily last laughed, where memory and present have collided. The shock still lingers, but beneath it is something gentler, a sense of recognition, of coming home. Lena realizes that Basil has been waiting, not just for anyone, but for her, for the only other person who understood what Emily meant to both of them. As the first drops of rain begin to fall, Lena shifts closer to Basil, her fingers brushing his fur. For the first time, she whispers his name aloud, the sound trembling in the space between them. Basil. The dog lifts his head, meeting her gaze with a calm that seems to say, I never really left. I was waiting for you to remember. As the rain grows steadier, Lena feels the pieces of her world beginning to shift. Not healed, not yet whole, but stitched together by the shared presence of memory, grief, and a Collie who never left his post. That night, the rain drums a steady, mournful rhythm against the roof of Lena's cabin. She sits at the kitchen table long after midnight, the mug in her hands gone cold, but she barely notices. The house is quiet, but full of echoes. Memories swirling in every shadow, the past pressing close now that she can't deny Basil's identity any longer. The encounter with Claire feels like the universe tearing down a wall she had built with painstaking care, exposing old wounds to the cold air. Lena knows she can't keep retreating into routine and silence. Not now. The truth has come to find her, and with it, a duty she'd long tried to bury. She rises, opens the drawer of a battered old sideboard, and pulls out a box she hasn't touched in years. The lid is warped, the cardboard edges soft and feathered from age. She carries it to the living room and sits cross-legged on the faded rug, the box in her lap. Her hands hover for a long moment before she dares open it. Inside, a small world of memory waits. There are drawings, crayon landscapes, dogs with two big eyes, wild scribbles Emily would insist were rainbows. There are hospital wristbands, curled and yellowed. Old Polaroids. Emily grinning up from a hospital bed, Lena's arm draped protectively around her shoulders. Emily feeding Basil a treat, both faces alight with a joy Lena hasn't seen in years. At the bottom of the box is something she both hoped for and dreaded. A faded, fraying photo of Basil, Emily, and herself, all three sitting in the very meadow where Basil now waits each day. Emily's laughter is caught in that picture, wild and unguarded, her hair tangled by the wind. Basil, still just a pup, leans into her, and Lena's own smile looks impossibly young, before grief drew deep lines around her eyes, before the world felt so relentlessly heavy. For a long time, Lena just stares at the photo, running her thumb over its creased edge. She lets the memories rush in, unfiltered and raw. The sound of Emily's voice reading stories aloud, her questions about the stars, her quiet bravery when the pain was worst. And always in the background, Basil. Gentle, watchful, a steady presence through every storm. Beneath the photo, in a small velvet pouch, is Basil's worn therapy dog tag. Lena remembers slipping it off his collar after Emily's funeral, her hands numb, the act both final and impossible to accept. She couldn't bring herself to return it, not even to the rescue group. Instead, she kept it hidden, a secret she couldn't explain. Now, after all this time, it feels almost warm in her palm. The letters on the brass tag, faint but legible. Basil Therapy Dog. The touch of it brings tears she can't hold back. She closes the box, clutching the photo and tag to her chest. Her body shakes with sobs she's kept at bay for too long, years of grief and guilt crashing over her in waves. She weeps for Emily, for the girl who taught her more about courage and kindness than any adult ever had. She weeps for Basil, for all the days she refused to face the truth of his return, and she weeps for herself, for the nurse she used to be, for the hope she'd lost, for the part of her heart she'd sealed away in that box. When the tears finally subside, Lena sits back, spent but somehow lighter. The weight of memory isn't gone, but it has shifted. No longer a burden pressing her into the earth, but something she carries, something she can finally look at in the light. She wipes her face and rises, the photo and tag clutched tightly in her hand. In the quiet hush before dawn, Lena tucks the photo and tag into the inner pocket of her coat, close to her heart. She feels them there, solid and real, as she steps outside. The rain has stopped, but the world is washed clean. A thin mist curls across the meadow, silver in the pale light. Lena stands on her porch for a moment, breathing in the scent of wet earth and pine, letting the cold air clear her head. When she reaches the meadow, Basil is waiting as always. He sits up when he sees her, tail sweeping the grass. Lena kneels beside him, and for the first time, she lets herself touch his head, running her fingers gently through the coarse fur behind his ears. Basil leans into her touch, eyes soft, as if he's been waiting for this permission all along. She doesn't speak, not yet, but she opens her coat and shows him the photo and tag. Basil sniffs them, then rests his chin on her knee. Lena sits there for a long time, letting the memories settle around them, letting the past and present mingle in the soft light. She feels the grief, yes, but beneath it, she also feels gratitude for every moment she shared with Emily, for every small act of kindness, for the second chance sitting quietly by her side. The world seems to hold its breath as Lena rises and tucks the photo and tag back into her pocket. She walks the edge of the meadow with Basil close beside her, the grass wet against her legs, the sky brightening above the trees. She finds herself talking aloud, telling Basil about the first time she and Emily visited this place, how Emily had insisted they count every butterfly, how she'd convinced Lena to lie in the grass and watch the clouds drift overhead. The memories spill out, rough-edged but sweet, and Basil listens, silent and steady. Later that afternoon, Lena returns to the cabin, exhaustion tugging at her limbs. She brews tea and sits at her desk, the photo of Emily and Basil propped against her mug. She opens her old journal, its pages mostly empty since the funeral, and begins to write. At first, the words come haltingly, but soon they gather strength. A record of memories, hopes, regrets, small joys she'd almost forgotten how to name. As she writes, Lena understands that healing is not about erasing the past or pretending the pain never existed. It's about carrying those memories forward, about letting them change shape in the present, about finding ways to honor what was lost without losing herself in the process. That night, Before bed, she stands at her window, watching Basil settle beneath the porch light. He looks up at her, tail thumping once against the boards, and Lena feels a surge of something close to peace. She presses her hand to her heart, the shape of the tag warm through her coat, and whispers a promise to Emily. To keep showing up, to keep remembering, to keep loving, no matter how much it hurts. For the first time in years, Lena dreams, not of loss, but of laughter, echoing through the meadow, carried on the wind, returning, at last, to where it all began. The days begin to blend together in a pattern Lena hasn't experienced since her early nursing days. Routine, predictable, almost peaceful, but colored now with a persistent undercurrent of longing. It's as if she is circling something, always close but never quite able to step into the center. Each morning she wakes with a sense of purpose that is new and unfamiliar. Each evening she drifts off with the ache of things left unsaid. The box of memories remains on her table, the photograph and tag finding a place in her coat pocket, weighty against her chest. Yet she cannot bring herself to cross the invisible line between past and present. She cannot say the words she knows she needs to say. Not to Basil, not to herself, not to the world that keeps turning outside her small, self-made orbit. She keeps up her ritual. Out to the meadow, at first light, book and blanket in hand, scraps of food for Basil, the two of them finding their way into the morning hush. Basil is always there, steadfast and waiting, as if he has all the time in the world. Lena finds herself lingering longer at the edge of the grass before approaching, her steps slow, her breath measured, the photo and tag heavy in her pocket. She wants to speak, to tell Basil about the burden in her heart, to thank him for coming back, but the words remain trapped, heavy and sharp behind her teeth. On some days, she brings the photo out, letting the light catch its faded edges. She holds the tag in her palm, running her thumb over the engraving. Basil seems to sense the change, watching her with those deep, patient eyes. He inches closer, his nose touching her knee, his fur brushing against her hand. And Lena wonders if he remembers too, if the image of Emily, of laughter and wildflowers, lives somewhere in his memory as clearly as it does in hers. But always, at the crucial moment, Lena falters. She tells herself she needs more time. She distracts herself with small tasks, rearranging the cabin's furniture, weeding the narrow garden, scrubbing dishes until her hands are raw. She avoids town, avoids calls from her sister, avoids everything that might force her to break her silence. Even the comfort she finds in the meadow begins to feel fragile, as if speaking the truth might shatter the spell that holds Basil by her side. One morning, Lena brings a new book, Emily's favorite. She opens it to the marked page, her voice trembling as she begins to read. The words are familiar, but they taste different now, full of memory, shadowed by grief. Basil listens, as always, his head cocked, his gaze unwavering. As Lena reads, her voice grows softer, almost inaudible, until the words fade into silence. She closes the book, tracing the outline of Basil's tag in her pocket. She wants to tell him everything. How sorry she is for leaving, how much she misses Emily, how scared she is to let go of the pain. The words line up in her mind, ready to spill out, but her throat closes around them, and she sits in silence, the meadow around her humming with early summer life. The next day, she brings the photograph, tucking it carefully into the folds of the blanket. She glances at it often, sometimes catching Basil's eyes following her movement. He seems to sense the shift, his body tensed as if waiting for some signal. Lena keeps the photo in her lap, her fingers tracing Emily's smile, but she does not speak. The air is heavy with expectation. But still, she is not ready. Days pass. The world outside the meadow moves forward. Neighbors mow their lawns, the river rises with snowmelt, birds fill the trees with riotous song. But inside her small circle of routine, Lena remains suspended, unable to move forward or back. She begins to fear that if she speaks, the spell will break, that Basil will leave, that she will lose this fragile connection to Emily's memory all over again. And sometimes, at night, she dreams of Emily, Her laughter echoing through the cabin, her hands warm in Lena's own, her voice bright and insistent. "It's okay, Lena. You can let go." But in the morning, the dream dissolves, and Lena wakes with the old ache pressing down, the unspoken words burning in her chest. One afternoon, the weather turns stormy, wind rattling the windows and rain lashing at the glass. Lena lights a candle and sits on the floor with her memory box, pulling out each piece of Emily's world. A worn, stuffed rabbit, a watercolor painting of the meadow, a letter Emily wrote but never finished. She holds them, one by one, letting the grief wash over her. Letting herself remember not just the sorrow, but the joy. Emily's fierce hugs, her stubbornness, her boundless imagination. Later, as the rain eases, Lena bundles herself in her coat and heads for the meadow. The air is fresh, the world washed clean. Basil waits as always, shaking water from his coat as she approaches. Lena sits beside him, the photo and tag in her hand. She almost speaks, but stops, her breath catching. Basil nudges her gently, his nose cold against her wrist, his eyes understanding. It's not time yet. But it's closer. Lena can feel the barrier between her and the truth growing thinner, the space between memory, and now shrinking with each visit. The weight in her chest is shifting, the silence starting to crack. She stays in the meadow until the last light fades, her hand resting on Basil's back, her heart beating with the promise of words she cannot quite say. As she stands to leave, Basil follows her to the edge of the grass, pausing to watch her go. Lena turns, meeting his gaze, and for the first time, she does not look away. That night, she sits on her porch and writes in her journal, the words slow but steady. She writes about the meadow, about Basil, about the things she wishes she could say. She writes about fear and forgiveness, about memory and hope, about the space between the past and the future. She falls asleep with the window open, the night air cool on her face, the photo and tag beneath her pillow, and in her dreams, Emily laughs, bright and unbroken, reminding Lena that healing is not a single moment, but a slow, persistent return to the places where love was strongest, and where it might, someday, be found again. The world feels suspended in early summer, days stretching long and golden, as if Missoula itself is holding its breath, waiting for Lena to find the courage she needs. Each morning, Lena wakes with a low ache of anticipation and dread, a sense that the silence between her and Basil cannot last much longer. The air is thick with expectation. Even the bird song seems to urge her on. Lena's ritual remains unchanged. She makes tea, gathers her worn blanket and whatever food she can spare, checks to be sure the photo and tag are in her pocket, and sets off through the dappled woods to the meadow. Yet every day she feels the pressure building, the weight of all she has left unsaid, gathering just beneath her skin. She cannot go on this way forever, circling her grief like a wary animal. Something inside her is shifting, and though it scares her, she knows she cannot hold back much longer. The day of her confession arrives quietly, wrapped in the hush of early morning. Fog lingers in the low places, the sun not yet burning away the chill. Lena moves more slowly than usual, her body heavy with memory, her hands trembling as she tucks the therapy tag and photo deep into her coat. She senses something different in the air, an urgency that has nothing to do with time and everything to do with what she has carried for too long. Basil is waiting as always, settled in his familiar spot near the stones, dew collecting on his fur. He watches Lena with unblinking patience, tail thumping softly in the grass. She lays the blanket down, sits beside him, and for the first time does not reach for her book or food. Instead, she draws the therapy tag from her pocket and holds it out, letting it rest on her palm between them. The brass catches the weak light, its inscription almost worn smooth by years of worry and handling. For a long time, Lena sits in silence, the tag gleaming quietly, the photo heavy in her other hand. Basil's eyes follow her every movement, his body still but intent. Lena feels the old panic rising in her throat, the fear that if she opens her mouth, everything she's held back will come pouring out, too raw and unmanageable to control. But Basil waits, as he always has, with a patience that feels sacred. At last, Lena's voice cracks the silence. "I should have stayed." The words come out rough, broken at the edges, as if she's been underwater for years and only now surfaced for air. She doesn't look at Basil as she continues. "I should have told her. I was scared too. I should have been braver." Her hands begin to shake. She places the therapy tag on the grass between them, as if making an offering, then draws the photo from her pocket and lays it beside the tag. The faces stare up at her. Emily's, bright and wild. Basil's, alert and loyal. Her own, caught in a moment of uncertain hope. The sight of it unravels the last threads of Lena's composure. Tears rise, slow at first, then sudden, unstoppable. She presses the heels of her hands to her eyes, but the grief comes anyway, thick and deep, carrying years of regret and guilt and longing. "I tried so hard to be strong for her," Lena whispers, voice barely audible. "I thought if I kept it all inside, if I pretended I wasn't afraid, I could protect her. But the truth is, I was terrified, not just of losing her, but of what would be left of me when she was gone." Basil shifts, moving closer, until his warm side presses against her thigh. He doesn't make a sound. He simply leans in, his steady presence grounding her in the storm of her confession. Lena's breath comes in shuddering gasps, her body racked with sobs. She cries for Emily, for the girl's courage and laughter, and the unfairness of a life cut short. She cries for Basil, for the years he wandered lost, waiting for someone to remember him. She cries for herself, for the nurse who stayed too long in the shadows, and the woman who couldn't find her way back to the world. In the midst of her tears, Lena speaks the words she has most feared. "I'm sorry, Basil. I'm sorry I let you both go. I didn't know how to stay." The meadow seems to listen, the wind softening, the grass shivering beneath her. Lena feels something shift inside her, a loosening of the knot she's carried in her chest, a slow uncoiling of pain. She lets the sorrow come, and does not try to stop it. Basil's body is warm and solid beside her. As Lena's sobs quiet, he presses his nose gently to her arm, his breath steady and sure. She turns to him, meeting his gaze, and for the first time she sees not just a dog, but a witness, a keeper of memory, a bearer of the love and sorrow she thought she had lost forever. The confession doesn't erase the pain, but it changes its shape. The weight of her grief is still there, but it's no longer crushing. It feels shared, as if Basil has taken a part of it onto his own broad shoulders. Lena lets herself lean into him, drawing comfort from his warmth and patience, feeling the world settle around her in a new way. She stays in the meadow long after her tears have dried, her hand resting on Basil's head, the tag and photo glinting in the soft light. The words she has spoken hang in the air, not a burden now, but a beginning. Lena senses that this moment, painful as it is, marks the start of something new, a slow turning toward healing, a willingness to let the world in again. As the sun climbs higher and the day warms, Lena finally gathers her things, tucking the tag and photo back into her pocket. She stands and looks down at Basil, who rises with her, ready for whatever comes next. The past still clings to her, but it no longer holds her hostage. She feels the meadow breathe around her, alive with memory and hope. As she walks home, Lena repeats the words she could not say before, letting them settle into her bones. "I should have stayed. I was scared too. I'm sorry." And for the first time, the words do not break her. They simply belong to the story she shares with Basil, with Emily, with herself. The weight doesn't leave, but it shifts. And Lena knows she is not alone. The days after Lena's confession arrive softer, as if the world senses her need for gentleness. Each morning, sunlight spills through the curtains of her cabin and finds her already awake, heart quieter, her breathing easier than it has been in years. It isn't that the grief is gone. The ache still pulses beneath her skin, but now it lives beside something new. the faint, persistent hope that speaking the truth has set something in motion. Lena's nights are still troubled by dreams, but the memories feel less like hauntings, more like visitors she can welcome and then release. She finds herself talking aloud again, not only to Basil, but to herself, to the open sky, to the unseen presence of Emily that lingers in every corner of the meadow. The silence that once walled her off now feels like an invitation, a space where she can hear her own voice, tremulous at first, but growing surer with each word. On the first morning after her confession, Lena steps out onto the porch and finds Basil already waiting by the steps. He lifts his head and gives a soft, almost expectant bark. And Lena smiles, really smiles, not the strained mimicry she's worn for years. She sits on the porch steps, her knees drawn to her chest, and Basil nudges her hand until she begins to speak. "I remember how Emily used to sing in the car," Lena tells him, her voice a little rusty from disuse. She was always off-key, but she never cared. She just wanted to fill the air with something bright. The nurses used to joke that she'd scare away the crows. Basil cocks his head, as if waiting for more. So Lena continues. She speaks of the long nights in the hospital, the way Emily would make up stories about the other children and their families. She tells Basil about her own fear, how she worried every day she wasn't doing enough, that her strength wasn't real, that the mask she wore for Emily would eventually crack. The words come more easily with each story, the act of speaking, transforming her grief into something she can hold, examine, and slowly let go. The sky above the meadow feels endless, and Lena discovers that her voice can carry as far as she needs it to. Some days, Lena brings her journal with her, not for the purpose of medical notes, but for something different. She sits on the grass, pen poised, and writes in long, looping sentences. She writes about Emily, not as a patient, but as a child she loved, stubborn, mischievous, unafraid of asking hard questions. She writes about Basil and his silent loyalty, about her own failures and small triumphs, about the guilt that's lingered since the day she packed away her scrubs for good. The act of writing is new, almost dangerous. Lena has spent years avoiding her thoughts, burying them under routine and isolation. Now, as she fills page after page, she feels herself coming back to life. Her voice is hesitant at first, more accustomed to clinical language than confession. But with each sentence, her walls thin. She writes letters to Emily she knows will never be mailed. She writes notes to herself, reminders that it's okay to be broken, that surviving isn't a betrayal of those she's lost. Basil sits close by, sometimes dozing in the sun, sometimes lifting his head when her voice wavers. Lena realizes that she's begun to lean on him, not just as a reminder of the past, but as a companion in her slow journey back toward the world. He listens to her secrets, her confessions, her tentative hopes for a future she never dared imagine. One afternoon, as Lena scribbles in her journal, a breeze stirs the tall grass and sends a flurry of dandelion seeds spinning through the air. She laughs. The sound startled out of her, and for the first time in years it feels natural. She closes her eyes and lets the moment settle, realizing that the laughter is her own, not borrowed from memory, but born anew. That night, she makes a simple dinner, setting a bowl of food outside for Basil. She eats on the porch, watching the stars blink awake one by one. The world feels wider, more open, and Lena finds herself wishing, quietly, fiercely, for more days like this. She wants to keep moving forward, to speak without fear, to let her voice stretch and grow. The next morning, as she walks to the meadow, Lena notices small changes in herself. She waves at a neighbor passing by on the trail. She lingers in town just long enough to buy fresh bread, feeling only a slight prick of anxiety as the cashier smiles and asks about her day. She tells herself she is not the same person who hid from the world for so long. She is learning, slowly, that it is possible to come back. She returns to the meadow with a notebook full of stories and a pocket full of memories. Basil greets her with a gentle nudge, and Lena kneels beside him. "Thank you for waiting," she says softly, for staying until I was ready. As the days lengthen and the meadow bursts into full bloom, Lena keeps talking. She tells Basil everything she couldn't say before, about the loneliness, the anger, the moments of joy that felt like betrayal. She talks about Emily's courage, about the guilt she carried for surviving, about the hope she now feels, tentative and trembling. The more she speaks, the more the heaviness inside her begins to lift. In the quiet afternoons, Lena sometimes writes for hours, pages piling up around her, each one a small act of reclamation. She lets herself remember, not just the pain, but the love and laughter too. The meadow, once a place of fear and loss, now feels alive with possibility. The wildflowers sway in the wind, the sun warms her skin, and Lena's voice rises, strong and sure. The transformation is gradual, but unmistakable. Each word spoken, each story written, pulls her further from the shadow of grief and closer to the woman she once was. The woman Emily knew and loved. The woman who still has so much to give. One evening, as the sun sets behind the mountains and the air grows cool, Lena sits beside Basil and whispers, "I think I'm ready to live again." The dog lifts his head, eyes shining, and Lena knows, with a certainty she hasn't felt in years, that she is not alone. The weight of her past remains, but now it shares space with hope. Lena has reclaimed her voice, and in doing so, she has reclaimed herself. Morning breaks clear and bright, the air tinged with the first true heat of early summer. Lena wakes before her alarm, sunlight streaking across the floorboards of her small cabin. She lies still for a moment, listening to the hush that fills the house, the kind of peace that comes not from absence, but from presence. It's a fragile, hard-won thing, this peace, and Lena savors it like the first sip of coffee on a cold day. She sits up, stretches, and finds herself smiling. There is no heaviness in her limbs today, no urge to burrow beneath the covers or invent errands to keep her mind busy. Instead, there's a soft excitement, an undercurrent of possibility humming in her chest. She slips the photo and Basil's tag into her coat pocket, as she always does. But today, the gesture feels less like a ritual of mourning and more like an offering, a way to honor memory, not be trapped by it. Stepping onto the porch, Lena finds Basil waiting, lying in the patch of sun by the steps. He rises and stretches, tail wagging slow and steady. Lena laughs, a sound that comes easier now, and leans down to ruffle the fur around his neck. "Ready?" she asks, not expecting an answer, but Basil's eyes seem to say yes. They set out together, Lena moving with more certainty than she has in years. The path to the meadow is familiar. The scent of pine needles, the crunch of last year's leaves, the chorus of birdsong overhead. But it feels changed, as if she's seeing it for the first time. She's not thinking about what she's running from. She's thinking about what she's moving toward. When they reach the meadow, the wildflowers are in riotous bloom. Purple lupine, golden balsam root, splashes of red Indian paintbrush. The air hums with bees and sunlight. Lena breathes in deep and lets the view fill her. Basil circles her once and sits by her side, nose lifted to catch every scent. Lena stands still for a long moment, the photo and tag in her hand. She closes her eyes, letting the memories wash over her. The echo of Emily's laughter, the feeling of a small hand in hers, the sight of Basil's puppy clumsy run through these very grasses. Instead of tightening, her chest feels light, the weight shifted and remade. She's not trying to hold on or let go anymore. She's just here. Today, something is different. Basil rises, not to leave the meadow but to move. Pausing a few paces ahead, looking back as if inviting her to follow, there is no hesitation in him. The meaning is clear. It's time. Lena's heart stutters in her chest. She realizes with a clarity that startles her that she doesn't want to stay in this one place anymore, waiting for grief to loosen its grip. She wants to move forward, maybe not all at once, but step by step, with Basil beside her. She follows him, her pace matching his. neither rushing nor lagging behind. The trail curves gently away from the meadow, back toward the world she has avoided for so long. Trees part overhead, dappling them both in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The walk is silent, but not empty. Every step feels like a promise kept. As they round a bend and the rooftops of town come into view in the distance, Lena hesitates. Oh, she hasn't set foot in the heart of Missoula in months. Not since the day she left nursing and turned inward. Cocooned by guilt and sorrow. Her breath catches, nerves jangling. Basil pauses, looking up at her, eyes steady. Lena lets out a slow breath, feeling the weight of memory and fear and longing swirl together. Then she takes another step, and another. They pass the old community garden where Emily once planted sunflowers that reached taller than her head. The sight sparks a memory. Emily's hands dirt-smudged, her delighted shriek when the first shoot appeared. Lena lets herself savor it, letting the pain mix with pride and joy. Near the edge of town, they pause at the small cafe that faces the trail. Through the wide window, Lena sees a woman she recognizes, Mrs. Chen, who used to bring homemade cookies to the hospice on holidays. Mrs. Chen looks up, her eyes widening in recognition, and then she waves, broad and bright, as if no time has passed at all. Lena's first impulse is to turn away, to hide. But then, for the first time in years, she lifts her hand and waves back. It's a small gesture, but it feels seismic, a crack in the shell she's worn so long. Mrs. Chen's face breaks into a smile, and Lena feels a warmth spread through her that has nothing to do with the sun. Basil waits patiently as Lena stands on the sidewalk, watching the world move around her. Cars, laughter, the ordinary rhythms of life. She feels awkward, exposed, and exhilarated all at once. She stands straighter, feeling the ground solid beneath her feet. She doesn't go inside the cafe. Not yet. She's not ready for a crowd, for questions, but she allows herself a moment to imagine what it might be like, someday soon, to sit by the window with a cup of coffee. Basil at her feet, trading stories with an old friend. The vision feels possible in a way nothing has for years. They walk on, following the main street for a block before turning back toward the edge of town. The sun is warm on her face, and Basil's steady presence gives her courage. She feels gratitude, deep and overwhelming, for this simple walk, for the chance to belong to the world again, for the love that survives loss. When they return to the cabin, Lena sits on the porch, the photo and tag in her hand. She journals quietly, writing not about sorrow or fear, but about the hope blooming inside her. She writes of the meadow, of Basil, of the wave from Mrs. Chen, and of the possibility of tomorrow. That evening, she finds herself humming as she cooks, the tune old and off-key, but bright. Basil settles at her feet, content and watchful. The day feels complete, not because everything is healed, but because Lena has taken her first real steps forward. She thinks of Emily, her courage, her joy, her way of finding magic in the everyday, and realizes she is finally ready to carry those gifts with her, not just as memories, but as a guide for living. As darkness falls and the first stars appear, Lena stands on her porch, Basil beside her, and feels the future opening before her, unwritten, uncertain, but full of promise. Mornings come easy now. Lena awakes not to dread, but to the soft, steady comfort of habit remade. Basil curled by her door, the light just breaking over the pines, the gentle hush of a world still waking. For the first time in years, her heart does not feel like a locked room. Instead, she rises, draws the curtains wide, and lets the day in. She's found a new rhythm, one shaped by slow healing and small courage. Every morning, Lena journals on her porch, notebook balanced on her knees, a mug of tea cooling by her side. At first, she writes only for herself, lists of memories, moments that ache, small joys that feel like surprises. But over the weeks, her words change. They become stories, not just of loss and pain, but of laughter and hope, of the way wildflowers return every spring, no matter how harsh the winter. This meadow was the last place Emily laughed, Lena writes, one bright morning, her script loose and easy, her heart steady. I think it's where I remembered how. She pauses, the sun warming her shoulders, and glances at Basil lying by the steps, his eyes closed. his chest rising and falling, in a slow, peaceful rhythm. She smiles. There's a peace in this moment she never thought she'd find again. Basil has become her anchor and her witness. Each day, he lies on the porch with her in the morning, walks the trail at her side, and naps in the shade while she gardens or reads or sometimes just sits, letting the world move by. There is no leash. There's no need. He comes and goes with her, his presence both grounding and freeing, a silent promise that she is never truly alone. The meadow, too, has changed. Where once it felt haunted by absence, now it bursts with life. The grass grows high, butterflies flash bright in the sunlight, and the old stones where Basil first waited for her have become a favorite place for Lena to sit and watch the world. She brings her journal, reads aloud to Basil, sometimes just listens to the wind. She knows now that grief can linger, but it can also grow soft at the edges, making space for something new. Sometimes, on quiet afternoons, neighbors pass by and wave. Lena finds herself waving back without hesitation. She accepts the occasional invitation for coffee, lets friends old and new sit with her on the porch, listens to their stories, and shares her own. She even visits the cafe in town, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee and Basil resting at her feet, her journal open to a blank page, ready for whatever words might come. There is a growing circle of connection in her life, small, imperfect, but deeply real. On the anniversary of Emily's passing, Lena returns to the meadow, alone. The old photo and Basil's therapy tag in her hand. She kneels by the stones, closes her eyes, and lets the memory of that last day, Emily's laughter, the rush of wind through the grass, the feeling of being entirely present, fill her up. She lays the photo and the tag on the stone, her hand steady, her voice clear as she speaks. Thank you, Emily, for the love, for the laughter, for teaching me that even goodbye isn't the end of the story. Basil stands beside her, silent and still, and for a long while Lena sits in the grass, letting joy and sorrow coexist, neither one pushing out the other. It's a quiet, sacred moment, the kind that settles in the bones and stays there, unspoken but ever present. Afterward, Lena tucks the photo and tag back into her coat and walks home with Basil, the sun at their backs. The trail unfolding gently ahead. That night, she lights a candle on her porch, opens her journal, and writes a letter to Emily. You were brave enough to laugh when the world said you couldn't. I want to live that way, too. I think I finally understand. I will keep laughing. I will keep loving. I will remember you every day, not with fear, but with gratitude. As summer ripens, Lena begins to share her stories. She reads them aloud at the local library, submits pieces to a small magazine, and finds that her words, once so heavy with pain, can bring comfort and hope to others too. People approach her afterward, sharing their own memories of loss and healing. Lena listens, grateful for the chance to offer what she has learned. That the past cannot be changed, but it can be carried with gentleness and love. Through it all, Basil remains her quiet shadow, faithful and steady. He is there on crisp mornings, on rain-soaked afternoons, on long walks through gold-drenched grass. Lena sometimes wonders how long he will stay, if dogs carry out their own secret missions of healing, moving on only when their work is done. For now, she does not ask. She is simply grateful for his companionship, for the way he waits with her and walks beside her day after day. One evening, as twilight falls over Missoula and the air cools, Lena stands on her porch, Basil at her side. Fireflies blink in the grass, and the distant sounds of laughter drift up from the town. Lena closes her journal and breathes deep, feeling the bittersweet beauty of all that has changed and all that remains. In the hush that follows, she speaks softly, a vow to the night and to herself. Some memories don't haunt us. They return to remind us we can begin again. And in the final light, as the first stars appear, Lena smiles, her heart fuller than she ever thought possible, her story still unfolding, her laughter echoing once more in the place Emily loved best, If this story stood quietly beside you, consider sharing it and subscribe for more stories that return when we're ready.